Let us know.
Are we live?
Yes, sir.
Alrighty, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the August 19th, 2024 Government Operation Committee. We have been off for 2 months. Hopefully y'all enjoyed your summers. It's time to get back to work. We have just an information only meeting today. We don't have a quorum to approve the main meeting minute, but when our third colleague get here, we'll go back to that. So we'll jump right into it, and I'll hand it over to Mr. Saunders.
Sure. Appreciate your time. So at y'all's last meeting, you did move the dirt road policy, paving policy forward to the commission. For this meeting, we've been asked to provide a general overview on 3 of the outstanding topics. One is the Land Bank Authority, the second is renter protections, and the third is ACC Employee Engagement Survey. So we're going to give you all a pretty high-level survey. We've got a bunch of really qualified staff here for that. What we would hope to get out of this meeting is to give you all kind of that foundational knowledge and what each of these subjects is, but more importantly, to hear from you all preference for how you would like the chair to maybe move forward, but also if there's an area you want to dial in within the bigger context. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Director Melinda Lord to talk to us a little bit about Land Bank Authority.
Hi, so for the Land Bank Authority, we're going to do a quick overview on what a Land Bank Authority is. The ACC Gov Land Bank Authority are affordable housing investment funding that's been recently allocated, some challenges and some next steps, and then get some GOC feedback. So next slide. Land Bank authorities are created to hold, manage, and develop delinquent vacant properties. They can also, based on their structure, manage an acquisition strike fund if it's used for the purposes of ACC Gov purchasing of land. And it can also work with other partnerships, lending and nonprofit agencies to manage the housing trust fund dollars. They're a tool that many jurisdictions use to take care of converting vacant and abandoned properties and creating, especially for affordable housing, vibrant communities. And they are a powerful locational incentive that encourages redevelopment. Next slide. So bylaws for the ACC Gov Land Bank Authority were approved on October 8th of 2013 to establish the mission for the Land Bank Authority. They are a non-tax producing status project or advisory board. They have a board of directors that currently consists of 5 members that are appointed by the commission, and they serve a term of 4 years. And the bylaws currently allow for several different housing activities, including purchase, lease, and holding and disposing of real or personal property.
And Melinda, the ACC Land Bank Authority has been dormant for a while. So within this 5-member structure, are there any terms that have been filled, or are they all pretty much vacant at this point?
Since this was as of 2013, I believe they may have had a meeting in 2018, but since then I would assume that all positions are currently vacant. So for FY25, funding was allocated $2 million for gap financing to support LIHTC projects. You have $2 million that will be used to support single-family affordable housing activities, and then $1 million toward an acquisition strike fund. But we also have the voluntary inclusionary zoning fund and the affordable housing special revenue fund pilot. So there's some money that we already have that we're awaiting some guidance for, and then the new $5 million allocated.
So Melinda, for the the last two bullets, can we get, when you get a chance, how much is in each one of those funds?
The voluntary inclusionary zoning currently has 1.97 million that was paid in lieu of, from one entity. And the Affordable Housing and Special Revenue Fund currently has approximately $600,000.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Some operational challenges. So a land bank authority would require that you have paid employee positions to carry out those projects. They have to have certain skill sets, including an understanding of lending, mortgage, property management, because they are working on acquisition, disposition of properties for the county. So until a secure financial stream of income is secured, local government funds would have to be used as seed funding to start it off. You also have, again, that the staff would need to be knowledgeable of mortgaging practices, capital asset and property management. They also need to have a good understanding of planning and contracting processes. And they also don't have the power to use eminent domain or to collect taxes. So future continued financing would have to be reliant upon allocations from the government. Also, they could apply for federal and state grants. They could accept foundation grants. They could use revenue from property sales, and they can also accept donations.
So, as Melinda noted, the current dormant land bank authority, their enabling legislation is very much acquisition focused, and that is the bread and butter of almost every land bank authority. However, there are more than a dozen land bank authorities operating in Georgia. We believe that this can be a tool towards deploying those affordable housing funds, but it may not be able to accomplish everything, nor may it be the only tool that you choose to use. And so if you all want to take a deeper dive here, these are some possible next steps, which would include peer program review. We could also look for outside support. So I know like the attorney's office has got somebody that's been helping us on some of our more complicated affordable housing programs. They work out of Atlanta as legal assistance. And then you could also look at something like the Center for Community Progress. And they really focus on revitalization, but they have a lot of expertise in land bank authorities as a way to, as a tool to do that. Ultimately, I think if you're going to take the land bank authority active, you would want to take a deep understanding of their structure and mission and bylaws and see if any changes are needed and what it might take to enact those changes. And ultimately, that might be the product that you send to your peers. Are there any questions, discussion before we move on to the next topic?
So, welcome.
Sorry,
It's all right. So I would like to do, I like the idea of looking at other peer communities, see what they have. We did have a work session last Tuesday, one of those days. And there were some peer communities like Rome, Bacon Bib, and Savannah who have been doing it for, one of those communities, I think it was Bacon Bib, has been doing it for 20 years. Can we get some, can we look at, like, get some data on how they were structured, how they were founded, you know, their success rates, how many people in that community are getting help. And that's all I have, unless one of my colleagues have anything else.
Yeah, I would like, to get information on our land bank that we have now that's been dormant. As a new commissioner, I don't know any of that information, so, but I do agree with Commissioner Davenport. I'm looking at different municipalities and their land banks.
I think we could definitely do that. I would also suggest we might want to look at their funding streams and what kinds of programmings they offer, where it might differ a little bit from just straight acquisition and sale.
Yeah, I'm interested in pursuing the land bank authority as a means to, utilize these funds and acquire affordable housing properties because it's an existing entity. I actually sat on the land bank authority like way back in the day. We didn't do much other than like approve property acquisitions that were just little spits of land here and there that ended up falling into the local government's hands. But if there's a means of using this existing entity to achieve some of the affordable housing goals, I pursue it, and I think it's definitely worth looking at what other comparable communities are doing with their land bank authorities when it comes to affordable housing.
Do we have the opportunity, can we get a copy of the 2013 bylaws? And do we have the opportunity to make some changes?
Would it be,
Would that be on our purview of GOC?
So I think we can definitely get the bylaws. Austin, are those any foundational changes to the Land Bank Authority? Are they locally controlled or would that require state action?
I believe that's local is my initial inclination, but I'd have to check the bylaws.
So we'll double check that. And I think what we could do is maybe this body would recommend changes and structural things that might be needed to reactivate the authority, and maybe even a suggestion on where early work could begin. So we'll basically start to bring you the bones of that, if that's what we're hearing, is you would like to move forward. So certainly prior bylaws. What was the other question? Oh, and we'll confirm that those changes can be made locally.
And, so do you have any insights that you can provide from the original group?
I mean, honestly, back then, we were not very active. We met very rarely, and it was just when there was a property that we had to like vote on approving. There were like, I guess foreclosure, or not foreclosures, but tax property.
So what was the guidance for purchasing those properties?
I mean, they were just, from what I recall, they were tended to be like small little spits of land here and there, like maybe quick claims, and like maybe, GDOT would, quick claim a right of way or something to us when they abandoned a road plan or something like that. And then I do remember a couple tax foreclosure properties where like the heirs just no longer existed anymore and the property was just sitting there with no taxes being paid and government financing.
And the land bank can also complete the disposition of ACC owned property. And I know that's something that y'all mentioned being interested in, is the properties that are currently owned, you being able to sell those. The land bank could sell them at below market.
Okay. I thought Central Services did that. Those LBAs, they're the one who dispose of ACC property or could.
So big picture, there are several ways that you can dispose of property, and Austin, please correct me if I misspeak, but if the government takes the more traditional method, it requires the commission to declare it surplus, and then it basically requires a public, although sealed bid process. So, and ultimately that highest bidder would be brought back for the commission for a thumbs up, thumbs down. You could look at ways that you might deed restrict a property. So for example, if you were going to sell a historic building, you could consider something like a facade easement before you sell it. But ultimately your hands are pretty tied and you don't have a ton of control over that buyer. Another alternative is just a like for like swap. Those are pretty, just transactional. We have something you want, you have something we want, and we can prove that ours is worth less, like we're getting the better end of that deal, or at least an equal deal. The Land Bank Authority, and working through an authority, as Melinda had mentioned at the work session, does provide more autonomy. So it might be that land is intentionally sold below market, but to specific buyers that work to accomplish or advanced affordable housing goals. It can also be used to have a much narrower market. So if you think about it, instead of accepting the highest bid, you might accept the best proposal from a land bank or to a land bank authority. So somebody who is for profit that says, look, if you can give me this land for 20% of market value, I can commit to incorporate 1 or 2 affordable units into a bigger project that I'm doing there. And so ultimately that is the benefit, as it kind of works through the gratuities clause and helps to achieve it. Now, ultimately, I also believe that there has to be some high level of autonomy with that board, that the commission, through funding and enabling documents and so on, conveys the intent of where they would like the work to go. But much like we can't dictate the exact work of the housing authority, the Land Bank Authority would ultimately be its own little entity.
Okay.
That's an excellent characterization. Good job.
Any further questions? Other than, can we get voluntary inclusionary zoning fund, more information on that, and affordable housing, special revenue fund? And does other community use those tools as well?
The involuntary.
Mhm, and-
I believe that we created our ordinance based off of some other communities that currently have inclusionary zoning ordinances.
So in addition to the amounts, it would be helpful for you to know purposes
Yeah.
and methods of deploying that funding.
Well, again, the intent for the voluntary inclusionary zoning is to reinvest it back into the community for the development of multifamily rentals. It could be used to fill in LIHTC application gap financing. So it could be used similar to that LIHTC gap financing funding. But again, the entity that operates it that's what's gonna control how it can be used and allocated. So it's kind of sitting there with the others going, okay, how do we want to
Move forward.
enact these so that we're doing it in a way that the commission wants that money to be used?
So it seems like the LBA, once we get that, that would be that entity, correct? Once we approve it, if y'all,
They could do certain activities, but the intent for Land Bank Authority is really more on that acquisition and on that, disposition of ACC property, whereas if you look at the Savannah, model, they actually have a partnership, or there's a nonprofit CFDI that operates their housing trust fund. And then they have the land bank, which runs their acquisition, what we would call the acquisition strike fund, and the normal land bank activities. So a land bank can't do loans, but they can partner
with someone,
with a CFDI or with a nonprofit to operate some of the things that they technically would not do. So it's feasible that it could run through the LBA, if that's how it's set up to do.
so I like simple, something short, simple, like, okay. So a lot to think about, any further questions? All right, thank you so much, thank y'all. I guess we'll move on to the next.
Sure, so the next is an overview on renter protections. In this case, we've got the attorney's office will offer us a little insight on the legal framework, and then we have Doug and Jack from Code Enforcement, Building Inspections to talk a little bit about how it works locally. And that's mostly gonna focus around maintenance and the quality of the building. So with that, we'll go ahead and pass it off to Austin.
Sure. Thank you, Andrew. So when it comes to renter protections, we thought it would be helpful if we go over some areas under Georgia law where local governments are preempted from taking any actions that would affect renter protections. And so I've listed them here. The first one, there's a provision in Title 44 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated, I've listed here. That code section essentially prohibits local governments from regulating rent control. So we're not able to enact any ordinances that regulate the amount of rent that an individual pays for residential private property, whether that's multifamily or single family. That's an area of clear preemption under state law. Another area of preemption is found in Title 36 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated. I've listed that code section here. A couple of things. That code section prohibits local governments from requiring the registration of rental properties. And it also prohibits local governments from investigating or inspecting privately owned property unless there's probable cause to believe that a code violation has occurred. And lastly, I've listed here several provisions of Title 44 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated. very briefly, as you can see, there are several provisions that pertain to landlord-tenant law. That's sort of the last big area of state preemption. Essentially, local governments are, in essence, prevented from interfering with the private right to contract. And so that means that we can't do anything to intervene between private disputes between a landlord and a tenant. However, there are several civil remedies available under Georgia law that those individuals can avail themselves under.
And Austin, not to put you too much on the spot, I remember when we had a couple of large acquisitions of some rental property in Athens. Tenants that were using vouchers of one form or another were, those vouchers were not gonna be renewed at that location. Do you remember if Georgia law speaks to like income discrimination ordinances and whether or not the county has the authority to say that you must accept a voucher if it's presented?
That's a good question. Kind of going back to that provision of Georgia law that prohibits us from interfering with the private right to contract.
Right.
Our hands are a bit tied from the state level on what we can do in that instance.
Sure, thank you.
I have a question. Is one required to have a business license to, register through finance in order to rent a property?
I don't believe so.
Does state law prohibit that?
State law would prohibit, would prohibit any kind of registration of rental property. And so I don't know that there's any leeway under our code or state law that would require us or authorize us to enact something like that.
I mean,
I don't think anything is currently existing.
I mean, I would feel like it would be considered a business if you're offering. I mean, if you rent other stuff, it's a business, right?
I agree with Commissioner Link, because like if we're doing SCRs, then they have to be registered. If you have rental property that it's essentially it's income, it's additional income, they'll be considered a business. But what will,
I mean, real estate's an easy place to launder money because it is.
but what would registration improve? Like what would that?
I mean, I think it would just give us an idea of who the property owners are. I mean, it's often hard, especially in neighborhoods where you have problem properties. It's hard to figure out who the actual responsible party is. And it might give us a little more way to, give notice if the properties are dilapidating and just not fit to live in.
I see my colleague John hop on the screen. I'm gonna try to do that.
Sure. So I think that's something we need to look at a little bit. So what we typically refer to as a business license is an occupational tax certificate, and those are regulated in the tax title, which is Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated. I think it's Chapter 13 of that title. We would need to look at that to see what state law says about that. There are very specific rules about what cities and counties can do concerning occupation tax certificates, and frankly, I don't know the answer right off the top of my head to that question, but it's something we'd have to look at.
And Commissioner, is your hope, if we look into like whether or not an occupational tax certificate is needed, is that strictly for contact and communication, or is there something else you would hope to achieve by either knowing or being able to require that?
I mean, I think contact and communication, but, having an idea of, especially in our single family neighborhoods of what properties, might be in violation of the single family ordinance and then what the general landscape looks like when it comes to, the encroachment of student housing into these neighborhoods. Getting an idea of how that rental market impacts affordability. That's huge. Especially when you have, student housing that does garner high rents in traditionally affordable neighborhoods.
So I think we can, while we look at that, we can also think amongst ourselves of other ways that we might currently or be able to track ordinance violations and ownership is what I'm hearing. So as you probably know from looking at tax records, a lot of times that ownership is held in LLCs and they can be very dispersed even amongst single ownership entities. So I think we could show you how we go about doing that, but I suspect we're probably gonna land on the same frustrations you have, which is if you go through a registered agent, it's an attorney somewhere, that a lot of times is where that discussion ends.
Look, we can deny, um, occupation on tax, right? We can deny those.
Yeah.
So like, if we have a multiple violator, we can say, okay, well, you know,
You're no longer allowed to
go
rent
ahead.
this property, you lose your occupational tax, like we've come up with for the STR.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I just don't understand why, an individual property that is a rental property would fall under an occupation as well. It's a business operating out of a particular property.
it could, our attorneys get back to us.
Yes, we can.
I had that question this morning, because I have been notified that there is a new recovery home in Spring Valley that's operating.
What
And so that was, yeah, and so that was my question, like, how do we, as a local government, say, hey, because you're not permitted, what are the next steps? Being a new commissioner, I really wanted to know as well. I was getting complaints.
And I feel like any residential property that has some income potential, somebody paying money to live there, it should be considered a business. And fall under our additional taxes.
Well, I think what I'm hearing is we could certainly look into that and bring back more information, and I've got a few notes here about if there is a legal framework there that opens the door for that, what you hope to learn or be able to use that for.
Thank you, and, you continue.
So I think now we're gonna move into some of that, the process around property maintenance codes.
Sure, we'll talk a little bit about code enforcement division and what we do. The first thing I'd like to do is introduce, in case you guys don't know him, Jack Reddick. He's our new code enforcement administrator. John retired earlier this month, and I was pleased to move Jack into that position. I think he's going to bring a fresh set of eyes and some good enthusiasm to it. So we're happy to have Jack. So I think our role in renter protection is to try to make sure that all habitable buildings in Athens-Clarke County meet the minimum construction codes. And on owner occupied structures, we don't typically get a phone call. We may see something on the exterior require that owner to make a repair. On rental property though, we have an email and a phone number and a front counter where folks can come in and tell us if they're living somewhere that has property maintenance problems. And we see that through to conclusion to make sure the property comes into compliance with codes. So Jack put together these slides for us, and basically, he just listed some things we look for on the exterior, the interior. We look at plumbing, make sure all that's working properly, mechanical, electrical, fire safety requirements. We look at all those things. We make sure the house has address numbers on it. It can heat properly in the wintertime. And then if you have to, the code, believe it or not, the code doesn't require air conditioning for homes. Most of them have it now. But if you use your windows to bring in fresh air, then you have to have screens. So we encourage people. We go talk to neighborhood groups. We put out informational flyers and things like that, trying to encourage tenants to call us if they have a problem, because we can only see the inside of a unit if they call us and allow us to come in. We do patrols. So we drive by on this, we drive down every street in the county a certain number of times a year, a few times a year typically. And we look for exterior problems. And then if we see exterior problems, we find out the owner. Sometimes we'll go talk to who's living there and ask them if they have any other problems inside. So we try to stay proactive in doing this. But I know I've heard stories, and it always bothers us to hear these stories that people are living in homes that are unsanitary, unsafe. We really want those folks to call us. But I know there's reasons why they don't. And that's another aspect of rental protection, I think, that is a little bit beyond the scope of code enforcement. But Jack, did you want to say anything else about this slide?
No, since January 2022, we've had 593 cases. We've only issued 17 citations, so majority of them we get compliance by just issuing those warning notices. Like Doug said, we do patrols and we also respond to complaints and neighborhood outreach, those kinds of things.
Y'all have helped me a lot since I've been commissioner.
I remember, sorry.
Yeah, I have a question about parking and junked cars.
Yeah.
What is code enforcement's purview over that? I know that PD has some purview over that too, so I'm just trying to figure out who handles what.
Code enforcement handles vehicles that are parked on private property, so if they're in the front yard or something like that, then code enforcement.
Okay,
catches those.
so if they're on the right of way or on the street, it's
That's
PD. Okay.
Now, junk motor vehicles, if it's not operable or tagged, then it's considered a junk motor vehicle.
Yeah.
We can either have them repair it or move it.
Okay.
And Austin pointed out the need for probable cause in which to enter a place and make an inspection. Does a complaint have to come from a tenant, or could somebody, like, if DFAX went in there, let's not go to PD, if DFAX went in there for an unrelated incident and they noticed some things, could they refer to us?
They could refer to us, but we would need permission from the tenant in order to gain access to the inside of the property.
I think we would reach out to the tenant in that case, and
Yeah.
if they were willing to have us in to pursue it.
Is there a policy against, landlord retaliation? Against, a
I
tenant?
think there's state law that
There
covers
is.
that, right? I don't know, I don't want to put them on the spot, or also if they want to talk a little bit about that, but I think state law says that if a tenant calls code enforcement for service, they're not supposed to use that against them.
But it's used all the time.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure it is, and
Good point. Can we get,
We can take a look at that.
And I'll-
Get y'all some guidance.
is the landlord, hopefully I'm articulating this right, is the landlord rights in the state of Georgia, is that exhaustive? Like, they have the right to, well, not rights, when it comes to the maintenance and upkeep of that property. If I complain about pest control, do they have a certain amount of days to get that fixed? Or do they have to get it fixed if they can roof, insulation, AC?
Under state law, they have to maintain the structure in accordance with the building codes. That's what code
For the
enforcement.
local building codes,
Right.
okay?
Which are,
as far as timeframes, we typically leave that to the discretion of the officer, but they know that if it's a life safety issue, we're not going to give an extended period of time. It's going to have to be almost immediate. If it's something that is not an immediate life safety concern, we might be reasonable and give them 7 days, 14 days, depending on what the violation is.
So the officer, the code enforcement officer gives the date. So, okay, so now that's important. So like if a tenant has like a leaky roof and like it's raining and all that stuff. The code enforcement officer would say, you got a week to fix it or a month to fix it. There's no state law that says the property owner has X amount of days.
No.
It's in favor, okay.
And then in the case of a leaky roof, they would not only have to repair the roof, but any damage that occurred inside. So, and our officers follow through, make inspections once the corrections have been made before we ever close out the file of the case.
Any other questions?
No, I'm glad this came up though. I love code enforcement.
Thank you. We want to hear, honestly, believe it or not, we want to hear from more people. We don't like the thought that there's buildings up there that are substandard.
Yeah, one of the buildings was demolished and now it's becoming a garden across the street.
Okay.
Mhm.
I'll pivot just a little bit. When it comes to, I don't know, the Plan Commission does it, but are there any requirement to say or standard that are met when it comes to condemning property? Like it just, the roof's bad, the foundation bad.
There are standards that.
Okay.
And typically, it's an accumulation of issues with the house. If it's just the roof, it's just the floor system, maybe in one area. But if you've got multiple problems with multiple aspects of the building, and the number we use is if it takes more than 50% of the value of the house to make the repairs. So if the cost of repairs are more than 50% of the current value, then we typically will ask for demolition through a nuisance abatement hearing. Our first remedy for any type of property maintenance violation is to give warning notices and citations to bring those structures back up. But when it reaches a certain state of disrepair, it's almost not even worth it to try to repair. And a lot of times, honestly, in those cases, it may be air property that's not occupied, that we can, it may be owned by multiple individuals and they can't come together and decide about a maintenance plan or rental plan. That's typically what happens when you see an abandoned, dilapidated structure. It's got ownership issues.
Have, ACC, code enforcement, have we ever done that?
Nuisance abatement.
Well, condemn.
Oh,
Not for like.
Yeah, we work with Austin and the attorney's office to file a nuisance hearing. And the judge, the municipal court judge is the administrative hearing officer, and the judge will hear the case and then she will give the owners a certain time period to demolish if she finds in our favor. If they don't demolish within that time period, then the county can take it down, and we work with Melinda's group at HCD. They have funding. The house is taken down, and then a lien is placed on the property. So it's a whole process. It's multiple departments working together to get that issue solved. And we do several a year.
So I have a kind of like linking our last topic to this one. When it comes to those properties that are in danger of becoming so dilapidated that they're gonna be demolished, which I hate to see, especially in our historic neighborhoods, inevitably it ends up getting replaced with something monstrous and out of place. I'm wondering if we could, as we move forward with the restructuring of the Land Bank Authority, we could work with code enforcement in identifying those properties and maybe acquiring them before they get to that state, so we can make the repairs and convert them to permanently affordable housing.
I think that would be wonderful. One of the problems with these, I mentioned a while ago that you may have multiple owners. They can't get together to decide to sell either.
Yeah.
So
I
I
know
don't
that.
know if there's some way the Land Bank Authority could do something to clean up the title.
I know some of these developers that do, kind of ravenously go after some of these properties. They have the funds to do it, and they end up building, flipping the property to something that's, super high end and makes up for all that work that goes in front end. So that might be a place for the local government. We have to create some staff people who can work on that full time, because I know it's a lot of work.
And are you understaffed in, code enforcement?
Jack, what do you think?
Don't be shy. I know that.
You could also always use more help. Currently have 2 vacancies.
So, okay, so do anyone have any other question about renter protection? So the biggest issue seems like, from people in the community, just these slumlords, these people who don't want to replace windows and fix driveways and stuff like that. So, can I get a number on how many on average a year that go through the nuisance?
And I would guess 2 to 4
to 4 years.
year, because it's a pretty lengthy process. We've had really good luck this past year, though. We took, either 2 or 3 through nuisance abatement. And the owners finally decided, after they got a court order, they finally decided, oh, we're gonna lose this property. So they actually took it down at their cost. So sometimes they just need that nudge, you know, and like Commissioner Link said, we really don't want to lose buildings. And so we try to push people to fix these things up, but it just gets to a point where it's not even economically feasible to do that.
But when it comes to rent, we are bounded by state law, and unless we get real creative, we got some very intelligent attorneys work for HCC that. I guess there's no further discussion. We'll move on to our last topic.
Okay, well, we do that. At the time y'all decide you want to revisit this, or if you do, it sounds like your interest is primarily on bad actors from a maintenance standpoint, where we have some more authority than we might otherwise have in legal agreements or rent pricing and things of that nature.
And property, no, occupational tax.
Yeah. And, okay, well, we've got those notes, so we'll move on. So last but not least is the Athens-Clarke County staff survey. So we're gonna bring you up to speed. We have budget and strategy and HR here to speak to that. We'll talk a little bit about the past survey. Some things that have happened since then, how that aligns with various plans, and then what our next survey might look like.
So I'll start off and I'll kind of book in Lori's comments. We have conducted some other employee surveys in the past. There was an effort in 2016, 2017 by a team of innovation ambassadors, participants to survey employee satisfaction. And then we did it again in the fall of 2020. That was kind of a wide-ranging survey assessing kind of employee capabilities beyond their normal work duties. It was COVID at the time. We were trying to get all the help we could. So those 2 efforts existed in the past. They were not especially comprehensive. And for reasons I'll get into in a minute, they weren't a direction in which we wanted to go when we decided another employee satisfaction survey needed to be completed in 2023. So we did complete a survey in 2023. It was administered by the ETC Institute, which is a market research firm that has a kind of wide range of experience in conducting municipal employee satisfaction surveys. They're headquartered in Kansas. We decided pretty early into the planning stages that it'd be better to ensure anonymous responses and remove the possibility of, say, a supervisor seeing an individual employee's response. So that's why we kind of took it out of our own hands and put that responsibility with a third party. We came a long way in terms of email usage between, say, 2019 and 2023. So 96% of our organization's respondents indicated that email is their preferred means of communication with that ACC Gov. But in addition to the electronic version, the survey was also offered in paper form and at shared workstations throughout the government in cases where individuals are not issued, for instance, a workstation. There are shared workstations in some of the buildings where employees predominantly feel. The response rate was pretty much right in line with a similar in-house survey that I mentioned from 2020. Just a shade under 50% of all of our full and part-time employees who were surveyed responded. So that was a total of 716 responses. Not as high as we might have hoped. The survey was about 32 questions long. There were mostly multiple choice selection questions, but there were 2 free text questions as well, where employees were asked to name different aspects of working for ACC Gov that they most liked, and also those aspects of working here that they like the least. Employees also were asked to identify their department whether or not they lived in Athens-Clarke County, their number of years of employment, and whether they held other jobs outside of ACC Gov. So we fared pretty well in this survey. About 98% of our responding workforce think ACC Gov is a good employer. They're proud to work for Athens-Clarke County. And they would prefer to complete their careers in public service here rather than somewhere else. And about 90%, I think 87% indicated that they would recommend us to a friend or acquaintance as somebody good to work for. So that was pretty encouraging. And you can see here, we collected input across 8 areas, which were equipment and resources, communication and engagement, awards and recognition, work culture, compensation, benefits, empowerment, equity, inclusion and belonging, and professional development. With that, I'll over to Ms. Pollard.
Great transition. So as those have just read off, on the bottom of that, prior slide, those were the 8 major areas that were assessed. And then from a satisfaction standpoint, I'll share just some numbers with you about what those satisfaction ratings are. For the equipment and resources, it was 52% satisfaction. Communication and employment engagement was 61%. Work environment and culture was 73%. Employee empowerment was 68%. Equity, inclusion, and belonging was 70%, and professional development was 61%. So I saved the 2 lowest scores, percentage scores that we received, because that is reflective of what is on the screen. So compensation and benefits, that was 37% satisfaction, and the rewards and recognition was 44%. So from the standpoint of what kind of fell into the high priority, most important category for our employees, it is these 2 areas.
Okay, just wanna, to y'all employees, we can't pay y'all $1 million. Taxpayers gonna like that, but.
Well, and I think, interestingly, the survey went out, if I recall correctly, around the beginning of 23. And so since then, and we'll talk about this on the next slide, well, a couple of slides down, but I mean, the commission has taken some very specific actions and made some decisions around some of these things already. So the hope would be that these numbers have improved at this point, since we're a good 2, almost 2 years out from this survey.
It's just, I got you. How was the survey done? How was it implemented? So it was, every employee was sent an email from ETC, correct?
Yes, so we all received the email from ETC, but we also provided paper copies for employees who may or may not even have access to a computer. Their jobs just don't require that. Most departments make computers available for them. And I don't recall, Joseph, exactly how many of those came back on paper.
It was a very small number. I want to say it was 17, but I might be wrong. I will add to that in that email, employees will let employees know that it would take about 20 minutes to complete, and that time was, department heads were instructed that they could complete it on the clock, I guess.
So, because I'm thinking like public utilities, sanitation department, they're not gonna be on my computer. Like, could it be possibly sent to a personal email? Like, if I'm doing a survey, like the county surveys, I was doing them at home. Like, relax after dinner, I can collect my thoughts. And was department heads keeping track? Were they saying, did y'all complete it?
They would receive periodic updates that say, 49% of your workforce is not these individuals that completed it, because that would defeat the purpose, but they got a percentage, like, okay, and there was a little bit of competition too, like who could get closer to 100%, completion.
Were there any departments that had particularly low or particularly high participation?
I believe I don't wanna speak out of turn without having that right in front of me, but I can look into that.
We could let you know that. I don't remember that off the top of my head.
And as somebody who normally represents a department that has a lot of people out in the field and maybe not a lot of people that work with computers, I'll note two things. One is, I think, should be almost every, if not every place of employment has at least a general computer that employees can access because they're asked to do benefits and at times timesheets and other aspects through there. So it is important that they have that. The second is, while our staff may not have access to computers, they've always found phones to be a tool they enjoy. So it's not uncommon that they might pull it up on their own device and complete that survey. And then even those that may be like a terminal, for example, majority of central services staff have access to a tablet. So they could do that on their own time, or not their own time, they could do it during their work time.
Was there like a incentive on departments who had the most and who had the least?
Just internal competitions.
I think it's just sort of
That's
friendly.
fine.
Yeah.
Friendly fire. And one thing, you know, that we might look at going forward, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, is that, you know, we do have some computers available over at the, Water Resource Center. There's about 10 over there, and maybe just, you know, better communicating to employees that those are, you know, accessible as long as that space is reserved. Or maybe we set up, you know, specific times when that space will be reserved.
That's what I was
To go over.
kind of making a little event, dropping in snacks or whatever.
Yeah, get Melissa to make some sandwiches, make some tea. Come
If
on
you
now.
feed them, they will come,
Yeah.
is that?
No. You don't come.
So, so as we looked at those two that had the lowest percentages and began to drill down, we were also looking at how that ties back to the ACC strategic plan. And so goal 3 under organizational improvement speaks directly to recruitment, reward, retaining our employees, and certainly compensation benefits fall into that category. And then human resources strategic plan has 4 different sections under our goal number 3, which is to become an employer of choice in the community, that we feel like tied back to some of the compensation and benefit strategies that we could look at as we begin to address the 37% score for that. So on the next slide, these are some of the actions that happened in fiscal year 24. Mayor and the commission approved a 7% market increase across the board on our unified plan with a 6% pay table adjustment and a 1% allocation for our performance management. In public safety, it was fully funded for all of the pending step increases for the public safety departments and a 7% increase in their public safety step plans as well. Both of those directly speak to the compensation piece of the compensation and benefits area. Couple of other things that happened in fiscal year 24 is the Mayor Commission also decided to hold employee health insurance premiums. And it was for a half a year at that point because our insurance stuff is done on the calendar year. And so we were holding it at 68%. Since then, there has been some work with Aon to put together, based on the market study, a 5-year plan for us. And that 5-year plan would take us to a 75% employer cost share. So that's the goal with this plan. There was also an RFP for a unified table compensation classification study. That is scheduled. We are really hoping to get that contract signed and up and running within the next week. And then we began having joint meetings with pension and deferred comp boards to begin looking at both the retirement both of the retirement avenues for employees, and seeing what kind of changes, what other plan options might be available on that. For fiscal year, on the next slide, for fiscal year 25, I'm not sure what those little things are there, but you all, again, did market increases and table increases for both the unified plan and the public safety pay plans. This next bullet speaks to the action that was taken for fiscal year 25, where we will now be up to 71%, as our goal toward the 75%. We also have two other studies that are happening, that are in the RFQ processes right now. One is for the fire compensation study from the collective bargaining agreement that was approved, and also the sworn sheriff staff market study. In a effort to, because communication was another piece of this, it was rated at 61%. But I think one of the things is that it's difficult for employees to understand their compensation and benefits without seeing it as a package. And so we have also been working with one of our consultants in the benefits area to put together total compensation letters. This would include both the salary and all of the benefits for an employee. Those letters are scheduled to come out sometime between now and the end of September. And that time frame is specifically to have those in the hands of our employees before we begin open enrollment, which is in October. Hoping that will also, not only will it communicate that information to them, but that it would also help them to plan for what benefits they may want to add or subtract, as those decisions will be right in front of them at that time. And we are still in ongoing conversations with pension and deferred comp about different design options. So we just met, both of those boards just met this month, and the goal is to get another joint meeting to talk about how to move forward with some of the recommendations that they would like to make.
And Lori, if I might add, a few other key metrics outside of compensation. In this period, the Mayor and Commission did authorize fire union, which engages in negotiations every year. We're also still kind of midstream and updating our performance appraisal system. We're actually just shown a new revamp of what it looks like. It looks a lot better than version 1, so
Yeah.
Staff have been working hard on that. And then the manager's office also started barbecue and A, which will be continuing even in this interim period. And that really came out of them seeing where the firefighters were at, and a little bit of disconnect between your frontline employees and folks that work in those buildings. So,
Who cooking? I like barbecue.
I think Saul's house is doing.
All right, Joseph, if you'll take us into next steps.
Yeah, sure. So generally, it is a best practice to stick with a third party to administer a survey tool like this. There's not a lot of vendors working in this space and operating kind of deeper insights and cross tabulation to tease out the subtleties of the data. But there are some, and this is an activity that we think is important enough that it should be put out for proposal. And so the last time, this was an expense that was well under the $50,000 mark, so we went out for 3 quotes. But this time around, it might be better to just do an RFP and see who's out there in that space. The appropriate time to be doing that would be around this time next year. The vendor that we used last time, ETC, offered an importance agreement matrix that shows how our employees rank our organizational personnel priorities in terms of their importance versus how well or how poorly they say we're addressing those priorities. So we would expect that in the next iteration with the interventions that I've already mentioned, and then also our core values team working in this space, we would expect that we'd have a comparative tool to kind of assess how we're closing gaps in those previously identified high and very high priority areas, particularly in compensation, benefits, healthcare costs, opportunities for professional development, communication, and employee engagement.
So this is a good topic that I would like to get more involved in. I want to make sure all of our employees are happy. We cannot pay you $1 million each though. Sorry, just gotta throw that out there. But the biggest concern that I hear is with the benefits, not benefits, the healthcare cost. So the way I look at it, this is multifaceted. It deals with benefits, deals with retirement, it deals with compensation, it deals with how the employer work together, the 9 to 5. So, with the next iterate, so I do have a question about the next survey will be done next year. Why next year?
So this last one happened in early 2023 or spring of 2023. We were, as Lori mentioned, kind of in the middle of standing up our strategic plan, the goals of HR, both in the plan. We have a whole goal area, which is organizational improvement, which is mostly HR goals, and those goals those initiatives are well aligned with the initiatives in HR developmental plan. And so those initiatives speak pretty well to what we're trying to tease out of that survey. And so the idea is that if the completion of those initiatives is well aligned with what we'll see in a new survey instrument, which will go out kind of with the culmination of that plan, but we'll still have time to kind of adjust things in the new plan, which will cover 26 to 28.
And the pay and compensation, how long do that generally take?
So a couple of things I think that play a part in the next dates for our survey. One, that's what ETC recommended, is every 3 years in the survey. They note that in there, but I also think we have a couple of additional things that are going to be happening between now and then that I think will help close the gaps that we're trying to close. So specifically, we will be at least one fiscal year closer to our 75% of employer cost on benefits. And we will also in January of 26, our expectation is that we will have all of our information back from the pay study.
Okay.
I'd love to see us be able to have that communicated at that point before the survey comes out, but, but I think both of those things are falling within this same time period and will have an impact on how employees are feeling about compensation and benefits at that point.
And to your point, the kinds of things that employees keyed in on, many of them were quite expensive to change. And so that takes many years of work, and kind of hitting on that 3-year interval allows you to take that pulse without over surveying folks and just kind of getting data that's not accounting for those changes.
So there was one thing that came up in the survey that was, very, very low hanging fruit, and that was pet insurance. And so that's already been implemented. So things that were easy to sort of grab and put into place have been done. And to Andrew's point, the more costly ones just take time, but we will continue to make those recommendations to the mayor and commission, that we keep at that 75, getting to that 75% for employer costs for benefits. So that'll continue to be recommended.
I'd be interested in seeing more detailed data that, shows by department how some of these areas rank. Because I think that could inform us in the budgeting process.
Yeah.
Like I did hear that they kind of ranked pretty low. So maybe we do need to invest more in equipment that's particular to certain departments. I know how frustrating it can be for some of those folks out in the field when we had a water issue on my block last week, and I know how frustrating it was for those guys to come out after hours and deal with it. So,
And they did, that was included in the survey, so I think it could be pulled out, right?
yeah, I mean, I think it would really help us. We need to focus some funding in very specific areas to,
Yeah,
and, you know, the folks who know the best, you know, what shape our actual equipment structure is in, guys who are out there fixing it.
you have any questions? So, yeah, can we get data, but, and I'm not trying to put Gertz on the spot, but, there's not much we can do at GLC, right? Because this, we got 3 years, y'all are through the budgeting process, the stuff that's already been implemented. We got the pay compensation study, we got some, staff, HR's already working on some goals that. I mean, that, I would hate to make, well, for me, I hate to make a recommendation since it's for American Commission when y'all are already doing the work. But what are y'all thoughts? It seemed like it's just one of those working process.
I will tell you that I don't know that very much work has been done on the rewards and recognition piece, and that was the second lowest score. You know, we have historically done service pins, those come out of HR, and so employees are continuing to get those. We have the Athena Award, so that's for like someone who's been here, you know, 30 years, and you gotta be retiring to get it. But I don't, you know, that is a little bit more of a tough thing to get your arms around because I'm not really sure, you know, what, you have to first of all know, I think, what people value as recognition and reward. And, you know, it's probably going to have some monetary. But I also think that that is something that is could be very department specific. And so, but maybe, you know, helping to generate some ideas of what departments could be doing. We have some departments in this government that do an excellent job with employee recognition. I don't know about reward because, you know, we have to know better what the reward that's being sought is. But I also know that departments have very recently been encouraged by the manager's office and by organizational development and the people and belonging departments to begin to tie our recognition directly to our core values so that when we do recognition, we're highlighting those core values that are aligned with whatever it is that the employees are doing. But I don't think that we have probably attacked that particular area as aggressively as we have with the compensation and benefits space.
Disney trips. Everybody loves Disney.
I thought you said we didn't have money to spend.
Big celebrations. I mean, I know working at UGA, we have these kind of big recognition things and it's kind of boring and
But I think a lot
impersonal, but if you're like a direct colleagues
Right.
and kind of social events, I think that.
Yeah, and we would say that like our employee picnics and,
Yeah.
you know, and those, and the holiday things are important in terms of reward and letting employees know that they are appreciated. I think it is valued more at the department level because that's where the relationships are.
Do we have to make a policy adjustment to do awards of recognition on the department level? Would that be recommended or just allow each department to, you know, do it on their own? It'd be more personal if they did it on their own.
First of all, they're gonna say, well, we don't have funds to, you know,
Yeah.
do things like that. But I think if we were going to go down that road, I'm not sure if we would. I think we would have to have some guidelines around what is acceptable to do. Because we have to be very careful with our gratuity, laws and things like that. And so, yeah, we would need guidelines.
I can see guidelines being a benefit. One that I've struggled with is, So as a director, when I've bought employees lunches or done maybe a team building exercise, I've just done it on my own card because there was no guidance. And so instead of trying to make that call, it was easier for me to pay for it. But if the organization said like to further rewards and recognition, an employee lunch up to X is the policy of this organization, I think it would have helped.
So maybe that's where this committee comes
Yeah.
in, is developing that kind of policy.
Kind of a guideline,
The
yeah.
department heads to
Or a
find out what appropriate.
X dollar amount
Yeah.
per employee
Right.
kind of thing, because, you know, I mean, HR certainly does not have as many employees as central services, and so we would in no way need the same amount of funding to do something like that. But I think for the most part, when those things are being done, it has come out of the pocket of the HR, I mean, the directors or department heads.
Okay, can you give us an example, not now, of what other departments are doing for their recognition?
I can give you one right now.
Go ahead.
We're doing a quarterly, team building training. But one of the things that we're doing is recognition of division, quarter of the employee of the quarter
Mhm.
per division, and then, employee of the department for the quarter. So we're doing plaques, just little plaques. And then we're doing little certificates that we're printing in the office for, you know, like, the person that meets the deadlines on time, and just little gratuitous, just fun, little rewards. But we're doing this at Sandy Creek. We're gonna have lunch, so we're gonna do training, and we're gonna do a team building activity and do this little reward. So that's an idea of something that we're gonna do every quarter, and I'll pay for it out of pocket. I don't have a problem with that, but it's good for the team to come together and to recognize staff that's going above and beyond on that quarter basis.
What would be a annual budget for team building, employee recognition, quarterly, annually?
Well, it'd be wonderful if the food came out of the budget rather than out of the director's pocket. And I would say depending upon, how many staff you have. I mean, we have right now a team of 17. And I think what's feasible for a lunch for that many people being catered is probably $300 to $350 just to cover the food, the drinks and everything.
I think if we look at the examples of what other departments are doing, we could highlight what that cost was and the funding source, if it was public or not. I remember solid waste did the highlighting of their employees in the flagpole. And to me, that was one of the more meaningful things I've ever seen this government do, because a lot of employees get a kick out of like opening the flagpole and seeing their face. And I don't think every department should replicate that, but I think that if departments could find ways to connect with their employees like Suki does, we'd all be in a good spot.
Okay.
What is the department that has the largest amount of employees?
Central?
Police department.
Police
department.
Central, I think, was fifth biggest last time.
Yeah, and I think on the unified table, public utilities has the largest number of employees.
So we wouldn't want their director to have to feed them.
Yeah, they're up around, what, like 200 companies? A lot, a whole lot more than 17.
So currently in each department budget, there's no budget for like food or,
Recognition and reward.
There is a line item for food that some departments use.
okay,
Yeah, now we have one in human resources, but ours is directly tied to the assessment centers that we do for public safety. So we have to pay those we have to feed those assessors, while they are with us. And that's what our food line item is for. And I don't know about other departments, but
Yeah, we have general operations, nothing that outlines specifically that we can use money for that purpose.
So
Nothing says we can't, but nothing says.
yeah, and that's what I was gonna ask, would that be messy to just leave that up to department heads? I'm gonna use X amount of dollars for recognition.
Well, yeah, we want to be, I think it would be helpful wherever we land to have some guidance.
Guidance,
yeah.
So, one example is, you know, I reviewed P cards. I got a P card from a director. It was a lunch. It was not exorbitant, but it's very unusual to see a lunch on a P card. And so I asked the director, I said, well, tell me more about this because it doesn't look like you were traveling. That particular director said, I was doing one-on-one meetings with my employees, and here is actually the agenda of what we covered. I said, that's fantastic. Upload that agenda. I'll sign off on that P card. But I don't know that other folks feel that they have the license to do that. So in the absence of any kind of structure, folks are somewhat going their own way, but you don't want it to swing the other way where I think Melinda's doing a great job and now there's a $200 steak dinner on a government expense. That's certainly not what our residents would expect from us. So I think we can look at what departments are doing. If y'all are open to it, maybe we engage the core values team and looking at what other organizations are doing and, we can kind of build some bones from there.
Yeah. And this might even be a great project for one of the next innovation ambassador groups, to put together a recognition and reward with these guidelines and gather up all the, what are we doing right now kind of. Those are kind of.
And so there's some short-term things we can get you very quickly, data by department we'll look into, compensation study timeline we'll follow up on. But I think if you would like to focus in this area on specific rewards and recognition, this might be one that you want to give a little runway to, and we can talk amongst staff about what's the best way to start to gather this data, but also engage staff who might be interested in just volunteering in this space or spending some time in this space.
No, that sounds great. Yeah, anything to put a smile on our faces. That's what we want. And you have mentioned some data, and I can't pull up my internet. But we had a work session about, it could have been a year ago. Time flies. Jill gave us, is that data in that work session when it came to the employee survey?
So I think Prior Manager Williams, pushed out that email.
So there's a report, it's a pretty polished report that I can share with you, and I can also share with you the crosstab data.
Okay.
You can kind of really, you can dig in and slice and dice it the way you want. But the report might be a good place to start. But for instance, you asked about department response rate. In the report, they tell you what the total percentage of responses came from what department. There's no denominator, so you don't know, like, for instance, sheriff's office had the most responses, but I don't know if they had the most responses per number of employees.
Yeah. All right. So.
That is the executive summary from that report.
Thank you.
Just to hold over until.
Okay.
And then will you send that?
Yeah,
Okay.
So I think in all three areas, we have some clarity on where the committee would like to focus. Chair, I guess if you'll talk with the committee and let us know which topic or topics you want to take those deeper dives on next time. We'll be moving forward.
Employee engagement is very important. Winter protection as well. About three of them, but so via email, I'll let you guys know or ask you guys a question what you'd like to proceed with at our next meeting.
Did you want to approve the minutes from one?
Oh, yeah, now we get to 5 minutes. All righty. Can I get a motion to approve the May 2024, no, the April 15th, excuse me, the May 20th, 2024 meeting minutes?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Monday, May 20th, meeting minutes are approved.
Also, make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, you gotta enjoy your Monday. Happy week.
Joseph.
Is it possible